Takže, zdravím vás. Zdravím vás všetkých, ktorí ste tu prišli na tento live stream, čiže ešte si to musím tu ponastavovať, tak ako stále, čiže dajte mi zo pár sekúnd. Som veľmi rád, že prišlo až toľko ľudí, čo je úplne super. Jak sme to nastavovali predtým, tak to bude asi najlepšie. Kedy si dáme boom, 5 minútovku na SCP 500. Áno. Takto. No. Aké máte očakávania v prvom rade? Čo očakávate od tohto marketu? Bude push smerom hore alebo dumpola party? Zatiaľ teda Bitcoin drží sa ináč veľmi, veľmi statočne. Ešte zo pár vecí, čiže tu nás si dáme... No. Nejvíc najlepší stream, super, ďakujem veľmi pekne. Čiže september, dobre, toto si tu takto natiahneme. Takto, tu nám budú news. Dobre, Bitcoin zatiaľ teda pušuje proti marketu, čo je celkovo dosť zaujímavé. A ešte by som sa z toho vysumáril, dobre. Tu bude toto. Kalendár. Dobre, sekundičku. Akorát som docvičil, čiže... A ešte FOMC. Meeting. Ešte tu zatiaľ nie je link. Dobre, čiže vyskúšame to takto. A tu ich debilnú zvučku. Toto si tu vypneme. Boom. Ešte sa musím pozrieť na to, že či vy vôbec budete počuť toho uja. A... Mali by ste ho potom počuť. Dobre. Počuli ste to... Že počuli ste Dark Vadera alebo nie? Dajte mi vedieť, lebo keď ste počuli Dark Vadera, tak budete počuť aj Pavela. Dobre, čiže super, počuli ste ho. Takto... takto a boom a môžeme prejsť na screen. Takže funguje? Všetko funguje. Dobre, a ešte jasné, že som to musel pokakať. Takto. No, dobre. Čiže tu nám uvidíme Paulíka a uvidíme výsledky. Čiže zatiaľ teda nič divoké sa nedeje. Idem sa teda povenovať trošička chatu, celkovo sa budeme venovať chatu. Ešte si dám tu na tablete. Kto ide na konferenciu, kto nie? Jež má ser na to teraz. YouTube. No, jasné, že musí tam byť tá debilná zvučka. Dobre. Nestíham vôbec nič. Takže, OK, toto máme zapnuté. A ešte sa prepojí so sluchátkami. Čiže toto tu musím odpojiť. Vidíte, koľko je to práce. Dobre. No. Dobre, čiže zatiaľ initial pump. Dobre, super. A teraz takto. No. Dobre, super. Všetko je nastavené. Zatiaľ teda mierna pumpa smerom hore. Čiže idem sa vám povenovať. Dobre. Toto tu, takto. Všetko je nastavené. A môžeme teda začať. Môžeme začať s tým, čo priniesie market. No. Hlasovanie do chatu, dobrý nápad. Čiže dáme hlasovanie o pump alebo dump. Start new pool. Nevyšlo mi na navýšenie. Dobre, myslím si, že jednoznačne sa môžeme zhodnúť na tom, že keď znížia, bude pumpa, keď navýšia, tak bude dump. Ale čo sa stane, keď nenavýšia? Čiže, máme tu pool. Dobre, čiže zdravím všetkých, ktorí ste tu teda prišli ešte raz. Zdravím Radima, Iva, Mišo, Tereza, zdravím ťa takisto, pekný večer všetkým. Pavol, proste samé stálica, niektorí aj noví ľudia, ktorí tu neprichádzajú až tak často. Čo poviete, dajú to vyššie o 25 bazických bodov? To by bolo celkovo prekvapenie na tom markete. Dobre. Čiže bude sa to rozhodovať práve teraz o niekoľko sekúnd, alebo teda o niekoľko minút. Čiže už tam spustili nejaké to trapné videjko na Federal Reserve. Ale to ma nezaujíma, nechcem to počúvať. Dobre. A ja som myslel, že si to ty dýchal. Nie, ja som to nedýchal. Dobre. Tí, čo máte nejaké pozície, určite stopky do plusov, ak môžete, lebo proste po väčšine zažívame ten pump and dump. Dá si niekto bramborák, než to začne. Niečo som chcel, ale som zabudol, že čo. Dnešný livestream bude tak do 8:30 max. 8:30? Nie, o 8:30 bude ešte len meeting, čiže musíme to dať do 9:00, tak do 9:30 maximálne, hej, lebo zase chcem ráno vstávať a dávať post a ten raňajší post mám taký pocit, že je trošička komplikovanejší, aspoň teda dúfam, že sa niečo stane a že nebude to tá posledná tretia voľba, lebo máš tak trafí. Si long nebo short, Tome, nebo nečekáš? Nemám nič otvorené, skrz toho, že nestíhal som. Prišli mi do toho nejaké extrémne veci tento týždeň, čiže tento týždeň predpokladám, že nebudú ani nejaké altcoin záležitosti. Skrz toho, že časovo som na tom dosť brutálne biedne. Možno zajtra, keď sa mi podarí pred obedom, možno do nejakej 10. 11. dať post na extra coiny, tak budú, ale po obede asi ťažko. Ale zajtra po obede máme Patreon livestream, čiže tento týždeň bude, aj na budúci týždeň proste mám také záležitosti, ktoré prišli mi do cesty, že proste musím ich riešiť a nebudem môcť sa venovať plne až tak kryptu, čiže ja si dám možno... Nechcem povedať, že si dám voľno, alebo keď tá volatilita bude veľmi zaujímavá, tak určite budem niečo tradovať, ale konkrétne teraz už to prišlo United Interest Rate, Projection, čiže už to tu máme, už 8 hodín. Čiže zatiaľ teda Dampola Party, niečo prekvapivé, úrokové sadzby, Fed Interest Rate Decision 5,5, oni to navýšili? Nie, 5,5 bolo maximum. Actual. 5,5, dobre, ostalo. Čiže nenavýšili úrokové sadzby. Nenavýšili úrokové sadzby, teda ostáva to na tých istých hodnotách. Dobre. Keep the target range na 22-ročnom highs na 5,25 až 5,5. Čiže ostáva to na tých istých číslach today. Following the OK, čiže tu by sme už mali takisto mať statement, keď to refreshneme. A začína Dampola Party. Kvôli čomu nikto nevie, ale PDF-ko, statement. Dobre, čo sa vyjadrili?
Online education, publications, and more. These resources are all free for educators to use in their lesson plans, or as they see fit. Many of the Federal Reserve System's regional reserve banks, located in 12 districts across the nation, also offer in-person and online professional development that allows educators to deepen their knowledge and hone their craft when it comes to economics,
personal toto asi vôbec nemenia, akože ani náhodou to nemenia. Lebo v kuse tie isté žvásty. Fakt, že tie isté žvásty, ešte to môžeme spraviť takto, aby ste to možno aj vy prečítali. Bude to prekladať? Nebude to prekladať. OK, super. Čiže zatiaľ tie isté žvásty dookola. Máme tu ale ináč masakrálny dump na S&P 500 market, aspoň teda riadny rozbeh. Čiže nič sa tam príliš veľmi nezmenilo. Pracovné pozície ostávajú z mesiaca na mesiac stále veľmi silné, nezamestnanosť ostáva takisto veľmi nízka. Inflácia ostáva elevated, čiže na tých istých úrovniach, ako to bolo predtým. Bankový systém je stále veľmi silný a solidný a odolný hlavne. Tight credit condition of the households and businesses are likely to wait on economic activity, hiring and inflation. Čiže už tu majú zatiaľ teda, čo sa týka tých úrokových sadzieb, hlavne okolo kreditov, okolo biznisov a takisto aj domácností. Hej, stále tá situácia ostáva veľmi tesná, čo sa kreditu týka, čiže príliš veľa priestoru tam nie je. Čiže situácia sa ani nezlepšila, ani zatiaľ teda nezhoršila, čo sa týka domácnosti a podnikov. Čiže stále dávajú bacha na infláciu, ich target je stále na úrovniach 2% z dlhodobého pohľadu, ostávajú na 5,25 bazických bodov až 5,5 bazických bodov. Dobre, čiže okolo tých 2% sa tam točia stále. Tu už nie je nič a následne board system voted. Čiže jednohlasne sa zhodli na tom, že úrokové sadzby ostávajú na 5,4%. Ale majú mať aj projekcie. to isté. Stále reinvestujú do mortgage-backed securities, stále budú navyšovať treasury securities o 60 miliárd mesačne. Dobre, čiže tu na žiadne prekvapenie a teraz ešte by tu mali mať projekcie projection. Čiže toto sme mali ten statement. Počkaj, to je blbý. Január, hore. They also act as a bank for banks by providing key financial services to banks. Tie projekcie sa zle čítajú, hlavne teda na livestreame. Čiže v tých projekciách prakticky ide o to, že ukazujú HDPčko, ukazujú nezamestnanosť, ukazujú infláciu, z dlhodobého pohľadu, aké sú ich teda očakávania. Zatiaľ teda S&P 500, Dampola, DYDX sú strieľa hore. Áno, to je celkovo stále taká... Tomino, vypni si tú tetu. Akú tetu? Je, minenky, nehovor mi, že ona tu hraje. Nie, dobre. Jakú tetu? Nestraž ma. Čo za tetu? Je, minenky, tá trúba tu rozprávala. No, tak to je v pierdoli. Ale no, a už som zarobil dneska. Už YouTube bude demonetize. Dačo ti tam keca, počúvame iný zvuk, to mi hudba. Aj, do riti. Ďakujem, škoda, že to nečítam. Sa stáva lepšie, no. Aj do frasa. No, dobře, čiže projekcie, HDPčko z dlhodobého pohľadu, change in real GDP, June projection. Long run sa chcú dostať na median, to je to, čo celkovo oni očakávajú, 1,8% HDPčko. Central tendency 1,7 až 2% z dlhodobého hľadiska a následne range medzi 1,6 až 2,5%, čiže 1,8 by mal byť teda priemer. Dobre, tu nám máme real change in HDP, čiže HDPčko ide dobre do riti. Median na rok 2024, čiže HDPčko v roku 2024 očakávajú, že bude na nižších hodnotách, čiže niečo okolo toho 1,8, 1,6. Unemployment rate očakávajú na tých istých úrovniach, no nie na tých istých úrovniach, ale že by mal trošička poskočiť v roku 2024 a 2025, čiže očakávajú, že nezamestnanosť trošičku narastie. PCE inflation, OK. A očakávajú, že inflácia sa teda dostane v roku 2023 sa dostane medzi 4 a 3%, čiže niečo možno okolo 3,5. Následne rok 2024 už majú zhruba niečo na 2,5 priemer a prakticky potom 2,2, 2,1 a na 2% z dlhodobého pohľadu. Čiže oni očakávajú, že budú sa točiť okolo 2% v roku 2025 až 2026. Čo sa týka PCE, inflácie, core PCE, prakticky to isté. Do roku 2026 chcú byť závodov. FOMC meeting partial assessment of appointment monetary midpoint target. Toto je federal funding. Čiže federal funding by takisto mal ísť na federal funding rates. Čiže to takisto očakávajú vyklesania prakticky už v ďalšom roku. Možno jedno navýšenie a ďalšie znižovania. Čiže tu nás sú tie úrokové sadzby, zatiaľ teda medzi 525 až 550 bazickými bodmi. Možno teda majú ešte jedno navýšenie možno do konca roka na tých až 6%. Čiže toto môže byť práve tá zlá správa a následné postupné znižovanie za celý rok 2024. Čiže začiatok vyzerá tak, že ešte rozmýšľajú nad navyšovaním A potom, toto je už akože, toto už ani sami nevedia. Ani podľa mňa nevedia, čo bude 24. Ale stále si tu vidno tou bodkou, že si tu stále ešte nechávajú otvorené vrátka na navyšovanie úrokových sadzieb. No, to je GDPčko, čiže to je len rozložená projekcia. Tu nám môže byť problém, keďže tu nám očakávali v roku 2024, ale septembrové očakávania na HDP sú oveľa lepšie ako júnové, čiže oni sa prakticky dostali s tým HDP na celkovo zaujímavé čísla. 2024 sa už posúva zase na vyššie čísla, čiže tá ekonomika by sa mala dostávať do stability, keď je to pravda. Nezamestnanosť prakticky takisto nepríliš veľmi trafili. Toto je ich problém, práve tá nezamestnanosť, že nedokážu pokaziť nejako ten market. Hej, keďže očakávania boli oveľa horšie v júni, ako je to teraz v septembri. Čiže ono môže byť, že tie projekcie sú trošička pohúbené, hej, že vidno, že toto im asi príliš veľmi neposuje, keďže oni chcú zlomiť troška market, aby teda utiahli infláciu. PCE inflation, tu sa skoro trafili. Tu nič, tu len HDPčko. No dobre, okolo tých projekcií to spravím lepšie zajtra. Alebo zosumarizujem to zajtra, keďže je tu veľa dát, ktoré si chcem prečítať a chcem ešte zareagovať na Bitcoin a na market. Predtým, než Ujo Pavlík, čiže on bude rozprávať zhruba o nejakých 20 minút, čiže máme čas práve na rozobratie tohto marketu. Dobre, zatiaľ teda, čo sa týka Bitcoinu, drží sa statočne S&P 500 market už až nie tak. Dáme si to na 45 minútovku. Na 45 minútovke zatiaľ Bitcoin ešte vyzerá úplne v pohode, zatiaľ ešte nezlomil žiadne kritické levely. Určite stále platí to, že by sme si mali všímať hodnotu 26 971 $, kde je support a následne hodnota 26 760 $. Najdôležitejšia bude asi tá 12-hodinovka, kedy na 12-hodinovke tu máme jasné levely. Potom, lebo teraz prakticky sme dostali dáta, ktoré z časti prekvapili, hlavne tá nezamestnanosť a to HDPčko. Úrokové sadzby, alebo teda aj to navyšovanie úrokových sadzieb, že aká je budúcnosť, že stále si vidno, že tam si stále nechávajú otvorené dvere práve na to ďalšie možné navyšovanie, alebo teda až na navýšenie zhruba na tých 6%, čo by znamenalo ďalších 50 bazických bodov v priebehu niekoľkých mesiacov. Čiže nechávajú si tam stále ešte otvorené dvere na to, aby tam mohli nejako to pušnúť hore, keď inflácia začne trošička lietať. Celkovo oni dostali teraz CPI-ko, aj PCI-ka boli trošička vyššie, než sa očakávalo. Čiže možno práve kvôli tomu tam nechali ten priestor na navýšenie, na ďalšie navýšenie, keďže oni určite nebudú chcieť vidieť, aby inflácia proste začala stúpať minimálne. Ešte tento mesiac to bolo prvýkrát, čo po dlhej dobe trošička nám inflácia išla hore a zase viac ako očakávali, ale čo je veľmi dôležité, aby to nebolo 3 mesiace v rade, hej, lebo tam to už bude dosť veľký problém. Už ďalšie navýšovanie môže byť obrovský problém. Dobre, čiže jednoznačne vidíme zatiaľ teda na Bitcoine tú story, ktorú sme rozprávali. Jednoznačná rezistenčná hodnota medzi líniami $27 500, následne sa prtovka zhruba na tej hodnote 26 000, koľko to je? $26 600. Buď jeden alebo druhý level. Hej. Prejazenie silnej rezistencie alebo supportu je stále extrémne dôležité. Zatiaľ teda Zatiaľ teda koukni na dolár, pozrieme na dolár. Zatiaľ teda S&P 500 market nevyzerá úplne na tom najlepšie a vyzerá to tak, že práve S&P 500 market začína sa dostávať do krásneho downtrendu minimálne na 45 minútovke. Stochastic RSI a RSI sú plne negatívne naladení na 45 minútovke, takisto aj VT Cross je extrémne negatívne naladený, ADX je takisto negatívne naladený, na Bitcoine zatiaľ teda žiadna zmena a žiadna story sa tam nepíše. Pozrieme sa ešte na dolár, keďže mi tu rozprávate, že proste dollar is going to the moon. Tak to hej. Dolár extrémne silný odraz a je to aj vidno na S&P 500 market, lebo toto je ináč dobre. Toto ináč chceme vidieť, lebo poslednú dobu nie príliš veľmi súhlasil dolár s S&P 500 marketom. Stávali sa dni, alebo boli dni a dokonca aj týždne, kedy S&P 500 market išiel smerom hore a takisto aj dolár išiel smerom hore. Nie je to príliš veľmi normálna vec, kedy po väčšine tieto markety idú presne proti sebe. Čiže chceme vidieť práve takúto reakciu skrz toho, že budeme vedieť reagovať na ten market normálne a vidno, že aj tá normalita marketu sa možno dostane do normálu, už keď to mám takto povedať. Čiže zatiaľ teda, ale hej, dolár, keď si to takto vezmeme, je na tých rezistenčných hodnotách. Keď si to troška upravíme, tak dolár má nejakú takú rezistenciu, pokiaľ nezačne zatvárať nad hodnotou 105,6, tak je to stále jeho hodnota rezistencie prakticky skôr na tú úroveň tej 105,25 až 105,6 je hodnota rezistencie. Čiže uvidíme, že ako dopadne dolár zajtra. Stochastic RSI na weekly je zatiaľ extrémne pozitívny a čo sa týka, čiže on tu má veľmi pekne našľapnuté, ale zatiaľ z najhoršieho nie je vonku. Čo je dobre na dolári je, že dokázal si vytvoriť higher high. Čiže tu nám máme jednoznačný higher high a následne môže si vytvárať zase uptrend. Hej, a zase môže naberať na sile, čo by znamenalo, že keď naberie dolár na sile, tak tým pádom Wall Street, alebo teda Wall Street, akciový market môže trošička viac korigovať. Čiže ak následne začne korigovať market, uvidíme, že ku ktorej veci sa prispôsobí Bitcoin. Zatiaľ to vyzerá tak, že je viac naviazaný práve na dolár ako na akciový market, alebo teda na S&P 500 market a takisto aj na Dow, keďže Dow by mal ísť presne tou istou cestou ako S&P 500 market. Dobre, S&P 500 market zatiaľ teda ináč psycho. Hej. On psycho, tu mal menší fakey, jeho hodnota rezistencie na weekly je aj dosť dobre viditeľná, je práve tu. Čiže keď sa chce dostať dolár naspäť do pozitívnych chvíľ, musí prekonať práve túto hodnotu rezistencie 4,545. Jeho supportovka je na 4,373 a následne potom hodnota 4,299. Keď stratí tieto dané úrovne, tak potom je tu kopec supportov, ktoré ja teraz odstraňujem, aby to tu nebolo zbytočne metúce, ale potom sa musíme pozerať hlavne teda na úrovne 200 na weekly, čo celkovo si troška takisto opravíme a to bude práve táto úroveň 3931. Ale vyzerá to tu zle, hej, ináč Stochastic RSI plne vo vyklesávaní, VT Cross zatiaľ teda stále v bullish zóne, ale takisto vo vyklesávaní. Čiže OK, toto máme celkovo z krku, musíme si počkať hlavne teda na S&P 500 market a aj na dolár. Dolár, on proste pôjde presne, alebo teda S&P 500 market proste by mal ísť presný opak ako dolár by mal ísť presne opak ako S&P 500 market. Takto. Dobre. Čiže toto máme z krku. Zatiaľ, čo sa týka Bitcoinu, tu na príliš veľké zmeny nie sú, hej, stále. Easy, netreba to nejako príliš veľmi komplikovať. A hlavne, teraz by som fakt, že nechal priestor, minimálne pokiaľ Powell dokončí svoj speak a následne riešiť nejaké serióznejšie TA a hlavne serióznejšie zatváranie až niekedy po 12:00. Skrz toho, že otvorí sa nám potom Ázia, čiže Ázia môže už znormalizovať market a následne potom ďalší deň už by sme mali vidieť nejaký normálny pohyb, hej, že buď dodatočné ďalšie vyklesanie na S&P 500 markete a ďalší push na dolári a následne aj Bitcoin by sa mal už konečne spamätať a rozreagovať, lebo toto nie je úplne najideálnejšie, že máme takúto zase slabú range. Dúfajme, že zatiaľ teda, čo sa týka toho poolu, ktorý sme mali, tak 29% si myslí a hlasovalo 175 ľudí, čiže určite zahlasujte do konca tohto daného livestreamu, alebo teda minimálne dokedy Ujo Powell si povie svoje. Nenavýši, čo celkovo sme sa trafili, hej, že nebude sa navyšovať a bude pumpa, 29% si to myslí, nenavýši a príde dump, 14% si to myslí a nenavýši a zase sa nič nestane. 57% Doriti. Čiže zatiaľ aj tá predikcia funguje tak, ako má. Aj do riti tu. Čiže zatiaľ jednoznačne ostávame v teritóriu 27.300 až 26.800. Príde Powell, trošička sa rozprúdi market, keď ho uvidia, keďže jeho sivé vlasy málo kedy znáša dobre market. Následne prečíta to, čo sme si prakticky čítali pred chvíľkou, tam sa nič nestane a potom začne dostávať otázky a tam to môže posrať. Hej, tam sa to poväčšine buď poserie, alebo ten market zistí, že aha, OK, veď to nie je žiadny stres. Dobre, čiže toľko k tomu. Ideme sa teda nastaviť na screen. Nech vidíme, že kedy príde Ujo Šašo. Dobre. Čiže môžeme si oddychnúť teraz. Máme na oddych zhruba nejakých 11 minút, pokiaľ príde. Bitcoin reaguje na S&P 500 market? Tak áno, keď sa pozrieme na jeho reakciu, tak zatiaľ reagujeme na S&P 500 market. Čiže uvidíme. Celkovo ja si myslím, že keď sa pozrieme fakt, že na daily, tu nemáme príliš veľmi čo riešiť na Bitcoine. Zatiaľ na daily je to extrémny boj a práve tento týždeň, čiže Powell dohovorí následne, Bitcoin by nemal, alebo teda on stále bude ovplyvňovaný niečím, hej, S&P 500 marketom alebo dolárom, to je úplne jedno. Čiže on bude mať stále ešte niečo, čo ho dokáže ovplyvniť, ale minimálne žiadna konferencia alebo čo by ho malo položiť, hej, alebo na čo má čakať. Prakticky budeme mať do nového roka taký ten kvázi pokoj, alebo teda minimálne teda mesiac pokoj a ten mesiac alebo zo pár týždňov nám bude stačiť na to, aby sme zistili práve z tej daily, že či si vytvárame nižšie high a nižšie low, alebo proste začíname prerážať práve tej úrovne 27 700 a následne na daily zase sa dostávame do pozitívneho sentimentu a začneme prerážať a vytvárať higher high, higher low. Zatiaľ musíme si počkať a práve preto bude veľmi dôležitý tento týždeň a hlavne víkendy sú poväčšine zdochnuté. Hej, čiže tam nemáme otvorený S&P 500 market, ani dolár, ani Ázia, proste víkend je to, čo Bitcoin tam môže robiť niečo zaujímavé a dôležité. Po väčšine, hej, víkendy nerobí Bitcoin nič a čaká na S&P 500 market a práve preto už budeme vedieť možno sobotu, nedeľu stanoviť to, že aha, OK, vytvorili sme si nižší high a následne si tvoríme nižší low a následne vyklesávame, tvoríme si downtrend, alebo dokážeme ísť vypumpovať a prakticky zatvárať niečo. Takéto najpozitívnejšie, čo môže byť, je, že prerazíme tento týždeň, konkrétne tento týždeň v jednom švungu prerazíme hodnotu 200 a začneme zatvárať niekde na hodnote 28 000. Ak má Bitcoin, alebo teda tu je viacero možností, čo Bitcoin môže spraviť, a to konkrétne. Zatiaľ môžem si vytvoriť aj dokonca nižší high ako predchádzajúci, čiže to nebude až tak veľký problém, potom bude veľmi dôležitý low. Čiže keby sme zatvorili dneska, alebo zajtra, alebo hockedy, hej, do piatku, dajme tomu, že do piatku, alebo teda dneska už začneme vyklesávať, alebo zajtrajšia sviečka začne vyklesávať, táto ostane červená, ďalšia sviečka, alebo zajtrajšia sviečka sa spustí niekde na hodnotu 26 800 a následne piatková sviečka bude aj naďalej padať. Nebude to až taký veľký problém, pokiaľ si udržíme hodnotu tej 26 500 až tá hodnota 26 300. Ako náhle prepadneme pod EMA, tam nás Takto, toto som chcel. Tam nás nemá potom čo držať a to bude znamenať, že ako náhle stratíme hodnotu 21 a 30, vytvárame si nové low. A to nové low bude nižšie než hodnota $25 149. Čiže aj keby sme sa stočili práve teraz a nedokázali útočiť na tú úroveň higher high, tak to ešte nebude znamenať, že kompletne sme v prdeli. Hej? Čiže berte ten daily, ako to treba brať proste z dňa na deň, zo sviečky na sviečku. Čiže to bude ten scénar, kedy by sme skončili s negatívnym topom, alebo teda s vytvorením nižšieho high, ale nebude to ešte úplne v prdeli skrz toho, že môžeme si vytvoriť vyšší high a následne útočiť a pomaly si vytvárať vyšší low a vyšší high ako ten predchádzajúci. Čiže je tu kopec scenárov, ktoré sa môžu stať a zase, hej, čiže máme vytvorený analýzku na to, že čo sa stane, keby sme si tento týždeň vytvorili nižší high, čiže tam je potom tá možnosť, že vytvorenie si vyššieho low, alebo potom prepadá strata tých hodnoty 21 a 30 a následne vyklesanie a šialený dump. A už tam niečo nabehlo, ale zmizlo to. Alebo potom proste rovno začneme si vytvárať higher high a potom si musíme udržať tú hodnotu 21 a 30. Ale zatiaľ ten higher high je, keď sa pozrieme na 12 hodinovku, tak tu je to najčistejšia story, aká môže byť. Ako náhle prekonáme 200, tam potom je fakt, že čisté dvere na 28 200, 28 300. Čo by bolo celkovo pozitívne. Následne 21 a 30. Práve preto hodnota 12 hodinovka je práve preto úplne vynikajúca do pivnici. Tak, čo robíš? Tak, bum. Toto je jasné, že chcem vidieť na 12 hodinovke, prečo by nie, keď to chcem vidieť na minútovke. Čiže tu je to celkovo easy čitateľné. Dúfam, že ste to všetko pochopili. Keď nie, ja aj tak na to spravím ešte update, lebo proste tie live updaty. Hej, tu pozerám vec, tu pozerám chat, tu pozerám všetko, ale myslím si, že som to vysvetlil najlepšie, ako sa dalo. Čiže práve preto veľa ľudí to bere extrémne jednoducho a mieša 5 minútovku s 15 minútovkou, dôležitosť 15 minútovky, dôležitosť daily je úplne niekde inde. Aj to, že keď si vytvoríme nižší high, to ešte nemusí znamenať totálnu katastrofu. Lebo ten trend proste tam má ešte nejaké tie supportové línie. No a ideme na Uja Pavela. 25, čiže o 5 minút začne. Mini dump nuda. Áno. Dobre. 288 sledujúcich, 105 lajkov. Je to proste bieda. Aj tak najväčšie pohyby začnú, keď Jerome Powell začne štebotať. Skôr si myslím, že najväčšia volatilita príde, až keď začne dostávať otázky. Síce ono je to také celé smiešné, hej, že on tie otázky dostane, pripraví si na nich odpovede, čiže tam nie je žiadne prekvapenie. To je tak, ako keď ste niekedy sledovali WWE, čiže wrestling. Hej, to je takisto všetko tam nacvičené. Akože áno, sú tam proste, ľudia sa tam zrania, lebo predsa je to akrobácia. A taká tá akrobácia, hej, keď niekto na teba skočí 120 kg, tak jasné, že sa tam niečo môže stať, ale predsa je to tam veľa vecí nacvičených, pripravených. A to isté je aj ten Fed Report, hej, aj tie jeho otázky proste. Prečo sú tie otázky dôležité? Lebo on práve tými otázkami pripravuje market na všetky možné scenáre. A on chce si ukázať tomu marketu, čo prakticky potrebuje Fed. Hej, čiže keď Fed potrebuje, aby market bol v strese a aby neodpaľoval, tak všetky bude vyberať otázky také, aby zneistil market. Aby market bol v neistote. Keď bude tá situácia dobrá, tak ako sme to videli pred niekoľkými rokmi, kedy prišiel FOMC meeting, proste Powell povedal, všetko je v úplnom poriadku, proste ekonomika je zdravá, bla bla bla. Úrokové sadzby ostávajú mega nízke, nebudeme ich ani znižovať, ani navyšovať, proste ostávajú mega nízke, lebo všetko je v úplnom poriadku, tak vtedy market prakticky v kuse pušoval skrz toho, že bola tam stabilita. Oni teraz príliš veľmi tú stabilitu nechcú, lebo ako náhle podporia market, že OK, všetko je v úplnom poriadku a prestanú byť takí, že prestanú upozorňovať market na to, že môže prísť niečo fakt, že strašné, alebo horšie, tak proste začne odpaľovať S&P 500 market a to môže zvýšiť práve šance na zvýšenú infláciu alebo zvýšiť tú infláciu celkovo. Čiže oni podľa mňa zase tými otázkami budú vyberať také otázky, aby proste povedali marketu, že hej, ešte sa neteš, ešte nie sme z úplne najhoršieho vonku, stále si nechávame otvorené dverka pre ďalšie navyšovanie úrokových sadzieb do roku 2020 alebo do konca roku 2023. Neuvažujeme nad tým, aby sme znižovali úrokové sadzby, následne dostane nejakú debilnú otázku, že kedy môžu znižovať úrokové sadzby, nad tým ešte nerozmýšľame, ideme z meetingu na meeting, čiže to budú tie isté keci po väčšine. Keď je to váš prvý meeting, tak možno vás, hej, že budete prekvapení, ale keď to je váš už niekoľký meeting, tak proste nič prekvapivé tam podľa mňa nepríde. Hlavne, hej, keď to sledujete a keď viete celý ten priebeh toho, tak proste zatiaľ to vyzerá tak, že nepustia ten market do nejakej extrémnej pozitivity. Ináč ďakujem najprv Joškovi alebo Jozefovi, hlava tému, ďakujem ti veľmi pekne za 200 kaček za požiarníka či samuraja, či čo to je samuraj asi. A ďakujem takisto za ďalšiu šibuinu, čiže je to predsa len nejaký samuraj. Ďakujem Tereza za 499 kaček, ďakujem ti veľmi, veľmi pekne. Určite si daj celebrate your first super sticker. A jak to mám oslaviť? Dajak by som to aj... Niečo tu mám spraviť, alebo nie? No. A už prišiel Ujo. A už je to v prdeli. No, dobře. Čiže zapneme zvuk, keď nabehne a môžeme očakávať party. Ja už budem iba písať, čiže budem si s vami písať. Teraz skúsim do toho nekecať. Len keď niečo zásadné povie. Ale ako som hovoril, myslím si, že ja som to zhrnul a nič prekvapivé. Určite zažijeme niekedy nejaké prekvapenia, ale tento meeting to asi teda nebude. Dobře, začíname, pripravme sa.
Good afternoon, everyone. My colleagues and I remain squarely focused on our dual mandate to promote maximum employment and stable prices for the American people. We understand the hardship that high inflation...
Ináč veľká zmena, že už má tablet.
Price stability is the responsibility of the Federal Reserve. Without price stability, the economy does not work for anyone. In particular, without price stability, we will not achieve a sustained period of strong labor market conditions that benefit all. Since early last year, the FOMC has significantly tightened the stance of monetary policy. We've raised our policy interest rate by 5.25 percentage points and have continued to reduce our securities holdings at a brisk pace. We've covered a lot of ground, and the full effects of our tightening have yet to be felt. Today, we decided to leave our policy interest rate unchanged and to continue to reduce our securities holdings. Looking ahead, we are in a position to proceed carefully in determining the extent of additional policy firming that may be appropriate. Our decisions will be based on our ongoing assessments of the incoming data and the evolving outlook and risks. I will have more to say about monetary policy after briefly reviewing economic developments.
Počujete ho ináč? Dajte mi vedieť. Tu je kokos. Pump and dump.
And so far this year, growth in real GDP has come in above expectations. Recent readings on consumer spending have been particularly robust. Activity in the housing sector has picked up somewhat, though it remains
Vladislav, to je pravda, čo si
well below
napísal tú poslednú vetu.
largely reflecting higher mortgage rates.
To sa každý
Higher
čuduje.
interest rates also appear to be weighing on business
Slabo?
investment. In our Summary of Economic Projections, or SEP, committee participants revised up their assessments of real GDP growth, with the median for this year now at 2.1%. Participants expect growth to cool, with the median projection falling to 1.5% next year. The labor market remains tight, but supply and demand conditions continue to come into better balance. Over the past 3 months, payroll job gains averaged
Dajte mi vidieť.
150,000 jobs per month, a strong pace that is nevertheless well below that seen earlier in the year.
Lepšie. Super.
The unemployment rate ticked up in August, but remains low at 3.8%. The labor force participation rate has moved up since late last year, particularly for individuals aged 25 to 54 years. Nominal wage growth has shown some signs of easing, and job vacancies have declined so far this year. Although the jobs to workers gap has narrowed, labor demand still exceeds the supply of available workers. FOMC participants expect the rebalancing in the labor market to continue, easing upward pressures on inflation. The median unemployment rate projection in the SEP rises from 3.8% at the end of this year to 4.1% over the next 2 years. Inflation remains well above our longer run goal of 2%, 4% over the 12 months ending in August, and that excluding the volatile food and energy categories, core PCE prices rose 3.9%. Inflation has moderated somewhat since the middle of last year, and longer-term inflation expectations appear to remain well anchored, as reflected in a broad range of surveys of households, businesses, and forecasters, as well as measures from financial markets. Nevertheless, the process of getting inflation sustainably down to 2% has a long way to go. The median projection in the SEP for total PCE inflation is 3.3% this year, falls to 2.5% next year, and reaches 2% in 2026.
Daniel, ďakujem.
The Fed's monetary policy actions are guided by our mandate to promote maximum employment and stable prices for the American people. My colleagues and I are acutely aware that high inflation imposes significant hardship as it erodes purchasing power, especially for those least able to meet the higher costs of
Moon, a
essentials,
potom dám
food,
na otázky.
housing, and transportation. We are highly attentive to the risks that high inflation poses to both sides of our mandate, and we are strongly committed to returning inflation to our 2% objective. As I noted earlier, since early last year, we have raised our policy rate by 5.25 percentage points. We see the current stance of monetary policy as restrictive, putting downward pressure on economic activity, hiring, and inflation. In addition, the economy is facing headwinds from tighter credit conditions for households and businesses. Range for the federal funds rate at 5.25 to 5.5%, and to continue the process of significantly reducing our securities holdings. We are committed to achieving and sustaining a stance of monetary policy that is sufficiently restrictive to bring inflation down to our 2% goal over time. In our SEP, FOMC participants wrote down their individual assessments of an appropriate path for the federal funds rate based on what each participant judges to be the most likely scenario going forward. If the economy evolves as projected, the median participant projects that the appropriate level of the federal funds rate will be 5.6% at the end of this year, 5.1% at the end of 2024, and 3.9% at the end of 2025. Compared with our June summary of economic projections, the median projection is unrevised for the end of
Marek,
this year,
skúsi
but
zvýšiť
is moved
hlasitosť
up
na
by a half
YouTube.
percentage point at the end of the next 2
Ale
years.
vedieť.
These projections, of course, are not a committee's decision or plan. If the economy does not evolve as projected, the path of policy will adjust as appropriate to foster our maximum employment and price stability goals. We will continue to make our decisions meeting by meeting based on the totality of the incoming data and their implications for the outlook for economic activity and inflation, as well as the balance of risks. Given how far we have
Meeting
come,
by
we
meeting.
are in a position to proceed carefully as we assess the incoming data and the evolving outlook and risks. Real interest rates now are well above mainstream estimates of the neutral policy rate, but we are mindful of the inherent uncertainties in precisely gauging the stance of policy. We're prepared to raise rates further if appropriate, And we intend to hold policy at a restrictive level until we're confident that inflation is moving down sustainably toward our objective. In determining the extent of additional policy firming that may be appropriate to return inflation to 2% over time, the committee will take into account the cumulative tightening of monetary policy, the lags with which monetary policy affects economic activity and inflation, and economic and financial developments. We remain committed to bringing inflation back down to our 2% goal and to keeping longer-term inflation expectations well anchored. It's essential to set the stage for achieving maximum employment and stable prices over the longer run. To conclude, we understand that our actions affect communities, families, and businesses across the country. Everything we do is in service to our public mission. We at the Fed will do everything we can to achieve our maximum employment and price stability goals. Thank you, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you. Colby Smith with the Financial Times. What makes the committee inclined to think that the Fed funds rate at this level is not yet sufficiently restrictive, especially when officials are forecasting a slightly more benign inflation outlook for this year? There's noted uncertainty about policy lags. Headwinds have emerged from the looming government shutdown, the end of federal child care funding, debt payments, things of that nature.
So I guess I would characterize the situation a little bit differently. So we decided to maintain the target range for the funds rate where it is at 5.25% to 5.5%, while continuing to reduce our securities holdings. And we say we're committed to achieving and sustaining a stance of monetary policy that's sufficiently restrictive to bring down inflation to 2% over time. We said that. But the fact that we decided to maintain the policy rate at this meeting doesn't mean that we've decided that we have or have not at this time reached that stance of monetary policy that we're seeking. If you looked at the SEP, as you obviously will have done, you will see that a majority of participants believe that it is more likely than not that it will be appropriate for us to raise rates one more time in the 2 remaining meetings this year. Others believe that we have already reached that. So it's something where we're not making a decision by deciding to about that question by deciding to just maintain the rate and await further data.
So right now, it's still an open question about sufficiently restrictive. You're not saying today that we've reached this level.
We're not saying, yeah, no. Clearly, what we decided to do is maintain the policy rate and await further data. We want to see convincing evidence, really, that we have reached the appropriate level, and you know, we're seeing progress, and we welcome that. But you know, we need to see more progress before we'll be willing to reach that conclusion.
Just on the 2024 projections, what's behind that shallower path for interest rate cuts and the need for real rates to be 50 basis points higher?
Right. So I would say it this way. First of all, real interest rates are positive now. They're meaningfully positive. And that's a good thing. We need policy to be restrictive so that we can get inflation down to target, okay? And we're going to need that to remain to be the case for some time. So I think, you know, remember that of course, the SEP is not a plan that is negotiated or discussed really as a plan. It's accumulation, really. And what you see are the medians. It's accumulation of individual forecasts from 19 people. And then what you're seeing are the medians. So I wouldn't want to, you know, bestow upon it the idea that it's really a plan. But what it reflects, though, is that economic activity has been stronger than we expected, stronger than I think everyone expected. And so what you're seeing is this is what people believe as of now will be appropriate to achieve what we're looking to achieve, which is progress toward our inflation goal, as you see in the SEP.
Hi, Chair Powell. Thanks for taking our questions. How would you characterize the debate around another hike or holding steady? Is it discussion around lag times, fear of too much slowing, too little slowing? Could you walk us through what this disagreement was about at the meeting?
Yeah, so the proposal at the meeting was to maintain our current policy stance. And I think there was obviously unanimous support for that. But this, of course, is an SEP meeting, and so people write down what they think. And you have some, you saw, I think 7 wrote down no hike at this meeting, or between now and the end of the year, and I think 12 wrote down another single hike in one of the next 2 meetings. So it wasn't like we were arguing over that. People just stating their positions. And really what people are saying is, let's see how the data come in.
David,
we want to see, you know what we want to see. We want to see that
prakticky som povedal ešte pred meetingom, čo teraz hovorí. To isté.
We want to see that it's more than just 3 months.
Čiže stačí si to dať trošička viac dozadu.
The labor market report that we received, the last one that we received, was a good example of what we do want to see. It was a combination of across a broad range of indicators, continuing rebalancing of the labor market. So those are the 2 things. Those are our 2 mandate variables, and that's the progress that we want to see.
Pocit, že mám takú istú kravatu ako
they want to be convinced, they want to be careful not to jump to a conclusion really one way or the other, but just be convinced that the data, support that conclusion. And that's why, given how far we've come and how quickly we've come, we're actually in a position to be able to proceed carefully as we assess the incoming data and the evolving outlooks and risks and make these decisions meeting by meeting.
And in your view, I know nothing has been decided yet, but what would one more hike at the end of the year do to the economy or to inflation? And on the other side, what would no hike do, if you could sort of game that out for us?
So, you can make the argument that one hike one way or the other won't matter, but for us, we're trying, obviously as a group, it's a pretty tight cluster of where we think that policy stance might be.
Má všechno stejný etikety okolo. Áno, presne. Presne si to trafil brutálne.
Actually, we needed to go further than we had thought. If you go back a year and what we wrote down, it's actually gotten higher and higher. So we don't really know and that's why, again, we're in a position to proceed carefully at this point. A year ago, we proceeded pretty quickly to get rates up. Now we're fairly close, we think, to where we need to get. It's just a question of reaching the right stance. I wouldn't attribute huge importance to one hike. In macroeconomic terms, nonetheless, we need to get to a place where we're confident that we have a stance that will bring inflation down to 2% over time. That's what we need to get to, and we've been moving toward it as we've gotten closer to it. We've slowed the pace at which we've moved. I think that was appropriate, and now that we're getting closer, we have the ability to proceed carefully.
Steve Leisman, CNBC. Mr. Chairman, I want to return to Colby's question here.
David, no.
What is it saying about the committee's view of the inflation dynamic in the economy that you achieve the same
Môže to byť PHánov záznam z predchádzajúceho meetingu. Nikto by to ani
another half a point of the funds rate on it. Does it tell us that the committee believes inflation to be more persistent, requires more medicine effectively? And I guess a related question is, if you're going to project a funds rate above the longer run rate for 4 years in a row, at what point do we start to think, hey, maybe the longer rate or the neutral rate is actually higher? Thank you.
So I guess I would point more to, rather than pointing to a sense of inflation having become more persistent, I wouldn't think that's not, we've seen inflation be more persistent over the course of the past year, but I wouldn't say that's something that's appeared in the recent data. It's more about stronger economic activity, I would say. So if I had to attribute one thing, again, we're picking medians here and trying to attribute one explanation, but I think broadly, stronger economic activity means rates, we have to do more with rates, and that's what that meaning is telling you. In terms of what the neutral rate can be, we know it by its works. We only know it by its works, really. We can't, the model and that the economy reacts. And again, that's another reason why we're moving carefully now, because, there are lags here. So it may of course be that the neutral rate has risen. You do see people. You don't see the median moving, but you do see people raising their estimates of the neutral rate. And it's certainly plausible that the neutral rate is higher than the longer run rate. Remember, what we write down in the SEP is the longer run rate. It is certainly possible that, that the neutral rate at this moment is higher than that. And that's part of the explanation for why the economy has been more resilient than expected.
Let's go to Howard.
Howard Schneider with Reuters, thank you. So you've said several times that the economy needed a period of below-trend growth to get inflation consistently back to 2%. You kind of get that in 2024, a little bit, 1.5% is just a touch below what's the estimate of potential. So the fact that you're getting so much done at so much less cost, does that represent a change in how you think inflation works, a change in how you think the economy works, a change in the mix of supply healing versus demand destruction that's necessary to achieve this?
Yes, of course.
Mr. Briggs.
It is a good thing.
Ďakujem ti veľmi pekne za stukaček, za hrušičku.
Meaningful rebalancing in the labor market without an increase in unemployment. And that's because we're seeing that rebalancing in other places, in, for example, job openings and in the jobs worker gap. You're also seeing supply side things. So that's happening. I would say, though, I still think, and I think broadly people still think that there'll have to be some softening in the labor market. That can come through more supply, as we've seen as well. Also, remember, the natural rate we think is coming down, which is a supply side thing, so that the gap between any given unemployment rate that's lower than that and the natural rate comes down. That's a way for that's a way for the labor market to achieve a better balance. So all of those things are happening. You're right. In the median forecast, we don't see a big increase in unemployment. We do see an increase. And, but that really is just playing forward the trends that we've been seeing. That is not guaranteed. There may come a time when unemployment goes up more than that, but that's really what we've been seeing, is progress without higher unemployment for now.
So just to boil that down for a second, we've gone from a very narrow path to a soft landing to something different. Would you call the soft landing now a baseline expectation?
No, I would not do that. I would just say, what would I say about that? I've always thought that the soft landing was a plausible outcome, that there was a path, really, to a soft landing. I've thought that, and I've said that since we lifted off. It's also possible that the path has narrowed and it's widened, apparently. Ultimately, this may be decided by factors that are outside our control at the end of the day. But I do think it's possible, and I also think this is why we're in a position to move carefully again. That we will restore price stability. We know that we have to do that, and we know the public depends on us doing that. And we know that we have to do it so that we can achieve the kind of labor market that we all want to achieve, which is an extended period, sustained period of strong labor market conditions that benefit all. We know that. The fact that we've come this far lets us really proceed carefully, as I keep saying. So I think that's the end we're trying to achieve. I wouldn't want to handicap the likelihood of it, though. It's not up to me to do that.
Nick Timros of the Wall Street Journal. Chair Powell, both you and Vice Chair Williams have indicated that sufficiently restrictive will be judged on a real rather than nominal basis, implying some scope for nominal rate cuts next year, provided further compelling evidence that price pressures will continue to subside. Is the FOMC focused on targeting a real level of policy restriction? And can you explain what would constitute enough evidence that will allow the FOMC to normalize the nominal stance of policy while keeping real policy settings sufficiently restrictive?
I mean, yes, we understand that it's a real rate that will matter and that it needs to be sufficiently restrictive. Again, I would say you know sufficiently restrictive only when you see it. It's not something you can arrive at with confidence in a model or in various estimates. And so what are we seeing? We're seeing, through a combination of the unwinding of the pandemic-related demand and supply distortions and monetary policy's work in suppressing demand or alleviating very high demand the combination of those two things is actually working. You're seeing, inflation coming down. It's principally now in goods, also in housing services. You begin to see effects of it in non-housing services as well. So we think that is working. And I think as we've said, we want to reach that, we want to reach something that we're confident gets us to that level. And I think confidence comes from seeing, enough data that you feel like, yes, okay, this feels like we can for now decide that this is the right level and just agree to stay here. We're not permanently deciding not to go higher, but we would, let's say if we get to that level. And then the question is, how long do you stay at that level? And that's a whole other set of questions. For now, the question is trying to find that level where we think we can stay there. And we haven't gotten to a point of confidence about that yet. That's the stage
this year. And even then, it seems possible that core PCE inflation could come in even lower than the median at 3.7%. Would you see a case to raise rates still if it turned out that you were going to achieve the same real rate this year because the decline in inflation proceeds somewhat better than you currently anticipate?
The decision that we make at each meeting, and certainly at the last two meetings this year, it's going to depend on the totality of all the data. So the inflation data, the labor market data, the growth data, the balance of risks and the other events that are happening out there. We take all of that into account. So I can't really answer a hypothetical about one piece of that. It'll be trying to reach a judgment over whether we should move forward with another rate hike overall, and whether that would increase our confidence that yes, this is an appropriate move, and it will help us be more confident that we've gotten to the level that we need to get to.
Paris, zatiaľ perlička pekná.
Thanks, Chair Powell. Following up on Nick's question, actually, John Williams, the New York Fed president, obviously, has said things to the effect of next year, as we see inflation, kind of, again, to Nick's point, as we see inflation coming down, we're going to need to reduce interest rates to make sure that we're not squeezing the economy harder and harder over time. And I wonder if that's basically the logic that you apply. Is that how you think about it? And then I also wonder, in the last press conference, you said something to the effect of, it's a full year out, those discussions, and people interpreted that to mean that you didn't see
tam vedieť, keď pôjdem do Prahy určite.
Cut in the first half of next
ale malo by to
year.
byť
And I
ešte
wonder
tento rok.
if that was what you meant by that,
Dúfam.
or whether, how you
Ale budem mať len
that
možno
timing.
2-3 hodinky čas.
No, when I
Čiže
answer
musíme
these
to poriadne
questions about
dohodnúť.
hypotheticals about cutting, I'm never intending to send a signal about timing. I'm just answering them as the question is expressed. So please, I wouldn't want to be taken that way. Sorry, the first question was that how? Yeah, so we're as we go into next year, that's the question we'll be asking is, taking into account lags and everything else we know about the economy and everything we know about monetary policy. The time will come at some point, and I'm not saying when, that it's appropriate to cut.
Matelko, skúšal som to a veľa ľudí sa
Real
nehlasilo.
rates are rising because inflation is coming down. Part of it just may be that it'll be all the factors.
Každý, kto ma uvidí v Žiline, určite príďte. Idem tam kvôli vám niekoľko konferencií. Ale bol teda, no. Viem, že vás tam nájdem na jednej kope.
There's so much uncertainty around that. When we, in the moment, we'll do what we think makes sense. No one will look back at this and say, hey, we made a plan. It's not like that at all. These are estimates made a year in advance that are highly uncertain, and that's how it is.
Thanks so much, Chair Powell. Neil Irwin with Axios. Wonder, how do you think about the question of whether the strong GDP growth that we've been seeing is driven by excess demand versus supply-side factors, productivity, labor force growth? And relatedly, if GDP keeps coming in hot, even in the absence of inflation resurgence, would that on its own be a reason to consider more tightening?
So on your first question, we're looking at GDP very, very carefully to try to understand really what's the direction of it, what's driving it, and it's a lot of consumer spending. The consumer's been very robust in spending. So
stačí si dať moje logo CryptoInvest a budem vedieť, že ste odo mňa.
That's how we're looking at it. Sorry, your second question was?
There's GDP.
Netreba tvár, určite nie tvár, prosím, nie tvár.
So I think the
nie, že vás tam uvidím
GDP
stričkami môjho ksichtu.
Right? Maximum employment and price stability are the mandates. The question will be, is GDP, is the heat that we see in GDP, is it really a threat to our ability to get back to 2% inflation? That's going to be the question. It's not a question about GDP on its own. It's you're expecting to see this improvement, continued rebalancing in the labor market and inflation moving back.
Je tu ale niečo iné, čo rozpráva, to je konkrétne, že už sa vysral na infláciu a na COVID a kade také veci. Na C problém. Ale už rozpráva o HDPčku, práve o tej projekcii.
Hi, Victoria Guida with Politico. There are multiple external factors that are playing out right now. We see rising oil prices. We see auto workers striking. There's the looming, very real possibility of a government shutdown. And I was just wondering, for each of those things, could you talk about how you're thinking about how that might affect the course for the Fed and the economy?
So there is a long list, and you hit some of them. But it's the strike, it's government shutdown, resumption of student loan payments, higher long-term rates, oil price shock. There are a lot of things that you can look at, and so what we try to do is assess all of them and handicap all of them. And ultimately, though, there's so much uncertainty around these things. I mean, to start with,
určite budem dávať skôr 2-3 týždne post aj na Patreon, aj na Twitter, keď pôjdem do Prahy.
But we do have to make an assessment of its economic effects to do our jobs. So.
November, December počítam.
The thing about it is so uncertain. It will depend. The economic effects, it could affect, we've looked back at history, it could affect economic output, higher inflation, but that's really going to depend on how broad it is and how long it's sustained for. And then it also depends on how quickly production can make up for lost production. So none of those things are known right now. It's very, very hard to know. So you just have to leave that uncertain and
Zaujíma ma, prečo oni stále vypínajú chat. Prečo nezapínajú chat na tomto? Že som bol zvedavý na tie komenty.
Energy prices being higher, that is a significant thing.
Denis, ja som Tomáš, čiže teší ma všetkých, ja som Tomáš. Áno, málo kedy to rozprávam.
A sustained period of higher energy prices can affect consumer expectations about inflation. We tend to look through short-term volatility and look at core inflation. But so the question is, how long are higher prices sustained? We have to take those macroeconomic effects into account as well. Those are some of them. I'm not sure if I hit them all, but I mean, ultimately, you're coming into this with an economy that appears to have significant momentum, and that's what we start with. But we do have this collection.
Rosen, čau. Čo by bol mega shitpost?
Torres from Bloomberg News. I was a little surprised, Chair Powell, to hear you say that a soft landing is not a primary objective. This economy is seeing added supply in a way that could create long-term inflation stability. We have prime-age labor force participation moving up. Skills. Workers want to work. We have a boom in manufacturing construction. We've had a decent spate of home building. And since inflation's coming down with strong GDP growth, we may have higher productivity. All are good for the Fed's longer run target of low inflation. And if we lose that in a recession, aren't we opting for the awful hysteresis that we had in 2010? So are you taking this into account as you pursue policy? Thank you.
To begin, a soft landing is a primary objective, and I did not say otherwise. I mean, that's what we've been trying to achieve for all.
Soft landing je stále to, čo chcú dokázať. Good luck.
The real point, though, is the worst thing we can do is to fail to restore price stability, because the record is clear on that. If you don't restore price stability, inflation comes back, and you go through, you can have a long period where the economy is just very uncertain and it will affect growth, it will affect all kinds of things. It can be a miserable period to have inflation constantly coming back and the Fed coming in and having to tighten again and again. So the best thing we can do for everyone we believe, is to restore price stability. I think now, today, we actually, you know, we have the ability to be careful at this point and move carefully, and that's what we're planning to do. So we fully appreciate
to môže byť pravda. Chat vypnutý, lebo je to zo záznamu. Je to video, nie live stream.
Which is rebalancing in the labor market and inflation coming down without seeing, you know, an important, large increase in unemployment.
Nič by som sa ho nespýtal, lebo nedovolí sa spýtať niekoho otázku bez toho, aby ju mal pripravenú. Čiže...
Hi, thank you. Chris Rugaber at Associated Press. When you look at the disinflation that has taken place so far, do you see it mostly as a result of what some economists are calling the low-hanging fruit, such as the unwinding of supply chain snarls and other pandemic disruptions, or is it more a broad disinflationary trend that involves most goods and services across the economy?
Vyzerá to na tých nenavýšenia a zase sa nič nestane.
I would say it this way.
Dúfam, že zajtra bude lepšia analýzka.
From before when we lifted off, but certainly by the time we knew
that bringing
inflation back down was going to take, as I call it, the unwinding of these distortions to both supply and demand that happened because of the pandemic and the response. So that unwinding was going to be important. In addition, monetary policy was going to help. It was going to help supply side heal by cooling demand off.
Ale na to, ako dumpuje S&P 500 market a Bitcoin nič,
prekvapuje. So those two forces were always going to be important. I think it's very hard to pull them apart. They work together. I do think both of them are at work now, and I think they're at work in a way that shows you the progress that we are seeing.
Michael McKee from Bloomberg Television and Radio. In June, you forecast a 5...
Môže byť, že scenarista s režisérom píšu tie otázky. Už ani internet to nezvláda, tie ich somariny, čo rozprávajú v kuse to isté dookola.
What would justify that last move? Because the median forecast is for lower inflation. And given all the known unknowns that you face, how much confidence do you have, can investors have, or the American people have in your forecasts?
Well, forecasts are highly uncertain. Forecasting is very difficult. Forecasters are a humble lot with much to be humble about. But to get to your question, though, what's happened is growth has come in stronger, right? Stronger than expected, and that's required higher rates. Unemployment, you know, you also see that the ultimate unemployment rate is not as high, but that's really because of what we've been seeing in the labor market. We've seen more and more progress in the labor market without seeing significantly higher unemployment. So we're continuing that trend. In terms of inflation, you are seeing the last three readings are very, very good readings. It's only three readings. You know, we were well aware that we need to see more than three readings. But if you look at June, July, and August, you're looking at, you know, really significant declines in core inflation, largely in the goods sector, also to some extent in housing services, and just a little in
nič tam nevymysleli. Čiže keď si tu bol pred mesiacom a pozeral si ten meeting, tak je to isté. Keď si to pamätáš, čo vtedy hovoril, rozprával, to úplne to isté.
I think people should know that economic forecasting is very difficult, and these are highly uncertain forecasts, but these are our forecasts. They're
ale zatiaľ ináč vyzerá Bitcoin neúplne najpúliš. ADX sa začína rozbiehať negatívne. Ale zase, no, potrebuje dohovoriť čašu.
That you have, what justified not moving today, and what could justify moving in the future if you think?
Well, I think we have come very far, very fast in the rate increases that we've made. And I think it was important at the beginning that we moved quickly, and we did. And I think as we get closer to the rate that we think, the stance of monetary policy that we think is appropriate to bring inflation down to 2% over time, you know, the risks become more two-sided. And the risk of over-tightening and the risk of under-tightening becomes more equal, and I think the natural common sense thing to do is as you approach that,
vypnem ho a ešte poviem za pár posledných slov na Bitcoin, alebo ho nechám dohovoriť a potom už len skončím.
We're taking advantage of the fact that we have moved quickly to move a little more carefully now as we sort of find our way
Pavol, ak si niekde pri východe Môžeme si dohodnúť fakt, že všetci, čo ste pri východe, nejaké to stredko. Hej, niekde v baríku si sadneme, pokecáme.
Thank you, Chair Powell.
Najlepšie niekde v tichom prostredí, nech si pokecáme.
With your focus on year-over-year PCE, isn't it true that base effects are huge and that by the time you meet in November that it's more likely that you'll have a low PCE number that would make you feel more comfortable?
Ale tá je tam nová.
Secondly, how would the lack of key indicators like CPI, the jobs report, impact your approach in upcoming meetings if we were to have a government shutdown? Thank you.
Yeah, I missed the first question. What was what factors?
The base factors.
Base factors. Okay. So on that, we're looking at just monthly, right? You can look at just monthly readings and see what the increase was from the prior month. So you're right, when you go back 3, 6, and 12 months, you get base factors, but we can
Áno, na východ od Prahy, ale na východ aj od Bratislavy, aj od Bystrice. Aj od Tatier.
We don't comment on government shutdowns. It's possible, if there is a government shutdown and it lasts through the next meeting, then it's possible we wouldn't be getting some of the data that we would ordinarily get, and we would just have to deal with that. And I don't know, it's hard for me to say in advance how that would affect that meeting. It would depend on all kinds of factors.
Prečo hovoria
o... But it's certainly a reality that's a possibility.
O páde vlády.
But would you feel more comfortable on the base effects that as those kind of fall out of the equation for the next couple of readings by November, would you feel more comfortable at that point?
Yes. I mean, if you're looking, we can tell how much inflation has gone up in a given month, right? And that's what we're looking at. And month by month, what's the reading? And, I think what we're really looking at is there's a tendency to look at, shorter and shorter maturities, but they're incredibly volatile and they can be misleading. That's why we look at 12-month. But I think in this situation where it looks like we've had a bit of a turn in inflation starting in June, we're also looking at 6 months and even 3 months, but really 6 months inflation. So you're looking at it over that period and over longer periods. That's the right way to go. And we don't need to be in a hurry in getting to a conclusion about what to do. We can let the data evolve.
Thanks for the question, Chair Powell. Edward Lawrence with Fox Business. So I want to focus back in on oil prices. We're seeing oil prices, as you mentioned, move up, and that's pushing the price of gas. So how does that factor into your decision to raise rates or not? Because the last two inflation reports, PCE and CPI, we've seen overall inflation is actually
čo sa týka S&P 500 market.
So, energy prices are very important for the consumer. This can affect consumer spending. It certainly can affect consumer sentiment. I mean, gas prices are one of the big things that affects consumer sentiment. It really comes down to how persistent, how sustained these energy prices are. The reason why we look at core inflation, which excludes food and energy, is that energy goes up and down like that, and it doesn't. Energy prices mostly don't contain much of a signal about how tight the economy is, and hence don't tell you much about where inflation's really going. However,
long.
That if energy prices increase and stay high, that'll have an effect on spending. It may have an effect on consumer expectations of inflation, things like that. That's just things we have to monitor. So.
On the consumer, they're putting more and more of this on their credit card. The consumer seeing record credit spending. How long do you think the consumer can manage that debt at higher interest rates now? And are you concerned about a debt bubble related?
Skrátke, nenavýšili sa úrokové sadzby. Tie targety sú také isté. Nič vôbec sa nezmenilo. Ani sa nenavýšilo. Očakávajú stále 2% progres. HDPčko, že sa zlepší. Nezamestnanosť, že sa trošička zhorší, ale všetko je to v tých veciach. A nechávajú si otvorené dvere na ďalšie navyšovanie úrokových sadzieb, ak inflácia bude sa zvyšovať.
They're now moving back up to normal. We're watching that carefully. But at this point, these readings are not at troublingly high levels. They're just kind of moving back up to what was the typical in the pre-pandemic era.
Ja som z Trnavy, ale všetci ste východňare tu.
Yields along the Treasury curve have risen to their highest in years. What is the Fed's view about what's been driving that increase in recent weeks, and how much of it can be attributed to macro explanations and how much to technical factors?
So you're right. Rates have moved up significantly. I think it's always hard to say precisely, but most people do a common decomposition of the increase, and the view will be it's not mostly about inflation expectations. It's mostly about other things, either term premium or real yields, and it's hard to be precise about this. Of course, everyone's got models that'll give you a very precise answer, but they give you different answers. So, but essentially, they're moving up because it's not because of inflation. It's because it'll probably have something to do with stronger growth. I would say more supply of treasuries. The common explanations that you hear in the markets kind of make sense.
Ale v tej tombole má len jeden typ kravaty, len iný vzor, ale farba tá istá.
Just two on housing. You've said slower shelter cost growth is in the pipeline and will reflect in inflation readings as new leases are signed. But there's also some questions out there about the way housing costs are measured, particularly the use of rental equivalents, which are estimates from homeowners about what their homes would rent for if they were in the rental market. So my question is, how much of the effort to inflation, both as it's measured and felt by the broader public, hinges on housing supply? And then, as far as a constrained housing supply being sort of exacerbated by this sort of lock-in effect of mortgages being higher now than they were at their recent historic lows, how is that going to impact future thinking about taking interest rates to that lower bound in the future?
So on the supply point, of course, supply is very important over time in setting house prices and for that matter rents, and supply is kind of structurally constrained. But in terms of where inflation is going in the near term, though, as you obviously know, a lot of it is leases that are running off and then being re-signed or released at a level that's not as high. It won't be that much higher. A year ago, it would have been much higher than it was a year before. Now it may be below or at the same level. So as those leases are rolling over, we're seeing what we expect, which is measured housing services inflation coming down. Your second question was the lock-ins. How much is that affecting things, really?
26.
Affect your decisions to potentially bring rates down to their lower bound in the future, sort of creating that sort of bubble of buying and then a lock-in that sort of stagnates the housing market.
I think I would look at the lock-in, the idea being that people are in very low mortgage, very low rate mortgages.
S&P 500 bol riadne prepálený. Treba uznať, že bol úplne niekde inde ako Bitcoin. Čiže jemu zase ani nezaškodí to vyklesanie.
The new mortgage would be so expensive. Play a role in our future decisions in a future loosening cycle about whether we would cut rates. No, I don't think it would. I mean, I don't think that's. I think we'd be looking at what fundamentally what rates does the economy need, and in an emergency like the pandemic or during the global financial crisis, you have to cut rates to the point that you have to do what you can.
Pedro, aj tak sa áno, ukáže trenda zajtra.
So I wouldn't think that would be a reason for us not to do that. It's not something we're thinking about.
Očakávaš do konca roka pomalý nárast na 35 a potom pád? Ja dúfam, že najprv príde pomaličké vyklesanie, udržovanie trendu a niekedy rozbeh až 24, polovička roka 24, koniec roka 24.
Consumer spending, possible shutdown,
ostali na
prices. At this point, would the Fed welcome a decrease in consumer spending? Would that help you get inflation closer to your 2%?
Ale nechali si otvorené dvere na ďalšie navyšovanie úrokových sadzieb. Čiže povedali, že keď bude treba, ešte navýšime.
It's a good thing that the economy is strong. It's a good thing that the economy has been able to hold up under the tightening that we've done.
Pedro, určite áno.
It's a good thing that the labor market is strong.
Vy sa musíte ozvať nie ja vám, lebo zase nebudem vedieť, že to vám poznak to nie.
If the economy comes in stronger than expected, that just means we'll have to do more in terms of monetary policy to get back to 2%. Because we will get back to 2%.
Alebo môžeme si dohodnúť farbu, že všetci prídeme v červenej mikine alebo v bielej mikine.
Would you worry that could contribute to an economic slowdown or even a recession?
Well, that's always a concern. I mean, concern number one is restoring price stability, because in the long run, that's something we have to do so that we can have the kind of economy we really want, which is one with sustained period of tight labor market conditions that benefit all, as I've said a couple times. So that said, of course, you know, we also now
dám vedieť v piatok, že čo vezmem a môžeme to dohodnúť, že prídeme, alebo zajtra.
Thank you, Chair Powell. Simon Rabinovich with The Economist. One of the factors in the economic resilience to date appears to be a lesser degree of rate sensitivity than in the past. Obviously, we've talked about households with long fixed-rate mortgages, also companies that refinanced before last year. What is your thinking about the efficacy of rates and how that's changed? And then related to that, how do you think about the distributional consequences in the sense that if you're a relatively wealthy household with a long fixed-rate mortgage, the past year has not been all that tough with rates going up, whereas if you're relying on your credit card for supporting your consumption, in fact, times are getting a lot tougher, a lot more quickly. Thanks.
So what? I guess it's fair to say that the economy's been stronger than many expected, given what's been happening with interest rates. Why is that?
Čiže každý čiapku s vrtuľkou. Ani neviem, kde by som to zohnal. Ale dobre.
One is just that household balance sheets and business balance sheets have been stronger than we had understood. So that's spending is held up and that kind of thing. We're not sure about that. The savings rate for consumers has come down a lot. The question is whether that's sustainable. That it could just mean that the data is later. It could also be that for other reasons, the neutral rate of interest is higher for various reasons. We don't know that. It could also just be that policy hasn't been restrictive enough for long enough.
525 bazických bodov, 550, ale nechali otvorené dvere na ďalšie navyšovanie. Čiže
in all this uncertainty policy, and I feel like what we have right now is
povzbudiť market nepovzbudili.
Very strong labor market, but that's coming back into balance. We were making progress on inflation.
26 800 presne, ak som hovoril.
Many forecasts call for growth to moderate over the course of the next year. So that's where we are, and we have to deal with what comes. On your second question, your second question was distribution.
2720.
Can you be a little clearer about that?
Yeah, my point there was that if you're somebody who has a long fixed-rate mortgage, you've been able to endure the higher rates relatively easily. If you're somebody who's living month to month off of your credit card, current financing rates are punitive.
Yes, and so the point I would make there is that we're trying to get inflation back down. The people who are most hurt by inflation are the people who are on a fixed income. If you're a person who spends all of your income, you don't really have any meaningful savings. You spend all your income on the basics of life: clothing, food, transportation, heating, the basics.
Áno, poskočila, ale len trošku nad očakávania. To bude oveľa horšie, keď príde ďalší mesiac zase zvýšená a zase presiahne tie hodnoty. Ale dobrá táto.
As much as for anybody that we need to restore price stability, and we want to do it as quickly as possible. Obviously, we would like to do that. We'd like the current trend to continue, which is that we're making progress without seeing the kind of increase in unemployment that we've seen in past things. But you're right, though. When we raise rates, people who are living on credit cards and borrowing are going to feel that more. They are, and of course, people with lots of savings also have a much lower marginal propensity to consume, and so they're not going to. It's not going to affect them as much.
Let's go to Greg Robb for the last question.
Nie, bolo to prvý mesiac. Predtým bolo len pozastavenie, mám taký pocit.
Greg Robb from MarketWatch. In the Beige Book recently, you can tell that the Fed has been surveying nonprofits and community groups about the economic health of low-income Americans, moderate-income Americans. I have two questions about this. Are you going to use that data to maybe come up with sort of like a quarterly survey of those groups, like the Senior Loan Officer Survey? And And also the second question is, from your recent readings of these surveys, how are low and moderate Americans doing? Is there this thing where like the GDP is strong because of wealthy Americans kind of driving things? Just want to get your sense of the health of
asi v tom je niečo pravda.
So I don't know about the quarterly survey. That's an idea we can take away and think about. In terms of how low and moderate Americans, they're clearly we're suffering from high inflation. I think during the pandemic, the government transfers that happened were very meaningful. And if you know the surveys that we take showed that low and moderate income people were actually in very, very strong financial condition. I think now it's a very hot labor market, and you're seeing high nominal wages, and you're starting to see real wages are now positive by most measures. So
wow.
I think overall households are in good shape. Surveys are a different thing. So surveys are showing dissatisfaction, and I think a lot of that is just people hate inflation, hate it. And that causes people to say the economy is terrible, but at the same time they're spending money. Their behavior is not exactly what you would expect from the surveys. That's kind of a guess at what the answer might be. But I think there's a lot of good things happening on household balance sheets, and certainly in the labor market and with wages. The biggest wage increases having gone to relatively low wage jobs, and now inflation coming down, you're seeing real wages, which is a good thing. Thanks very much.
No, vedúci. Ukončil to jak veľký pán. Ja aspoň poďakujem, poviem dačo, a nie. Digonom. Bum! Koniec. Vybavené. No, čiže tak na východe sa niekedy tak rozprávalo, a hlavne tí, čo nebývali v Košiciach. Bulíme v Rici a nie v Košici. Vyzelíme hovno a nie lietadlo. Čiže aj u ňoho. Aj v preklade je, že dozvedeli sme sa nič, ne, lebo sme sa bar z toho veľa nedozvedeli. Prekvapiť neprekvapil. Zopár vecí tam povedal, hlavne teda na inflácii, akože čo sa týka inflácií, zhruba to isté, tam proste pár veľa vecí nebolo, ale hlavne to, že už sa začínajú pozerať zase na HDPčko, čiže majú s čím zase sa vyhovárať, že proste kvôli HDPčku teraz musíme riešiť to, že úrokové sadzby musia byť vyššie alebo stále na tých vyšších hodnotách. Prekvapivo nič tam nepovedal, hej, prekvapivo. Stále nenavýšili úrokové sadzby, target je z dlhodobého hľadiska na tých 2%. Labor market, alebo teda trh práce je stále veľmi silný a odolný. Nezamestnanosť je stále na dobrých hodnotách, alebo teda tight condition, hej, že je taká trošičku v napätí, ale v dobrej kondícii. HDPčko tam mám taký pocit, že trošička spomalenie a nechávame si otvorené dvere na navyšovanie úrokových sadzieb. V tej projekcii aj tam ukazovali, že by mohlo byť navýšenie úrokových sadzieb až na tých 6%. Nepovedal, že či budú navyšovať alebo nebudú navyšovať na ďalší meeting. Čiže povedal zase tú istú hlášku, že ideme z meetingu na meeting, z meetingu na meeting, z dát na dáta. Uvidíme, že ako dostaneme dáta ohľadom CPI-ka, PCI-čka, PPI-ka, čiže všetky tie veci dookola. Čiže zase môžeme robiť to isté dookola. Čo sa týka Bitcoinu. Dobre, začneme teda Bitcoiníkom, následne prejdeme S&P 500 Market, následne sa pozrieme aj na dolár a končíme. Zajtra spravím live stream, na live streame vysvetlím situáciu okolo Bitcoinu a následne to potom púšnem vonku. Spravím aj nejaký výcuc ohľadom FOMCčka v zajtrajšom videu. Len taký mierny výcuc, čiže aby sme to všetci mali pokope, že keď to niekedy chce niekto nájsť a porovnať si ten predchádzajúce navýšenia teraz, tak zistí, že príliš veľa sa toho neudialo. Dobre, zatiaľ teda sa príliš veľa neudialo ani na Bitcoine, zatiaľ stále to isté. Máme tu tú range, ktorú nám hlavne teda stanovuje práve hodnota 45 minútovky. Na 45 minútovke hlavne teda sledovať ani nie túto úroveň, ale konkrétne takto, čiže už si to môžeme pomaličky poposúvať, čiže sledovať sledovať práve túto hodnotu supportu, ktorá tam je. Toto by mohla byť teoreticky nová range pre Bitcoin, hlavne teda na 45 minútovke $26 750 až tá vrchná hodnota $27 300. Uvidíme zajtra, že ako sa to začne zatvárať. Zatiaľ teda 45 minútovka extrémne negatívne naladená aj na Stochastic RSI a takisto aj na ADX. Stále nás tu ale bude držať tá supportová línia. Od tejto línie sme sa celkovo odrážali zhruba nejakého 12. septembra. Držíme túto danú úroveň a hodnotu, čiže zlom tejto úrovne nás potom bude ťahať na hodnoty $25 700, čo je z toho dlhodobého hľadiska zase tá istá riť, ako to bolo predtým. Hej, čiže to bude práve táto línia, ktorú vidíme aj na 12-hodinovke. Čiže veľa zmien tam nenastalo, aspoň teda zatiaľ. Vieme tam posúdiť len jednu vec. Na 12-hodinovke zatiaľ si teda jednoznačne sme si vytvorili higher low. Lower high. Čiže jak to povedať po slovensky alebo po česky? Vyšší, nižší bod. Čiže toto je zatiaľ bearish, lebo si vytvárame, alebo teda bearish naladenie, keďže si nevytvárame vyšší bod, ale práve ten vyšší bod je nižší ako ten predchádzajúci. Čiže máme tu lower high, čo nie je úplne najskvelejšia vec. Teraz celkovo dosť veľmi podstatná a dôležitá hodnota bude práve tá 26 600 až tá úroveň 26 290 bodov dolárov pre Bitcoin. Zatiaľ teda jednoznačne rangeujeme, čo sa celkovo dobre traduje. Na 15 minútovke a na 5 minútovke je to už dosť negatívne naladené a to hlavne skrz toho, že strácame hodnotu 200. Rezistencia na 15 minútovke nebude ani tak na hodnote 200, ale dnes sledovať určite ešte hodnotu $27 126, čo je prakticky úroveň 21 a 30. Zatiaľ stále veľmi negatívne naladený na Stochastic RSI a RSI, takisto aj na ADX a zatiaľ dosť neutrálny a celkovo v pohode je VT Cross, ktorý sa stále drží v bully zóne. Na 5 minútovke je to tá story, že proste up and down. Zatiaľ teda držíme range. Čo sa týka supertrendov, tak supertrendy nám možno trošička v tom pomôžu. Čiže rezistencia zatiaľ teda na Bitcoine $27 030 až $27 100. Na 5 minútovke ADX je stále ešte extrémne naladený a pokiaľ sa nedostaneme nad úroveň teoreticky na 27 100, tak ostávame stále negatívnejšie naladené na týchto menších timeframoch. Tu na 45 minútovke mám už zaznačenú a stále ostáva tá hodnota supportu práve na 27 700 a túto líniu by som aj sledoval. Zatiaľ teda máme vytvorenú jednoznačnú hodnotu rezistencie a zariaďoval by som sa hlavne teda na 12 hodinovke práve cez tú 21 a 200. Čiže zatiaľ teda range trading. Nič iné, nič nové. Pozrieme sa ešte rýchlo na S&P 500 Market, kde má nejaké body, hlavne teda na väčších timeframoch. Čo sa týka weekly timeframeu, tak na weekly supportová línia je 21 a takisto aj 30. 21 sedí na hodnote $4366 až 30 na väčšom supporte $4284. Čiže toto sú veľké supportové línie, následne ďalšia hodnota nebude ani tak stovka ako hodnota 200, ktoré sú spojené na línii 3939, 3950, hej, pokiaľ by tam došla ten daný prepadík alebo tá korekcia. Zatiaľ teda vyzerá to tak, že trošičku dostane S&P 500 po ústach, keďže Stochastic RSI a RSI sú nasmerované smerom dole. Zatiaľ teda ADX je dosť brutálne neutrálny, čiže nevyzerá to na nejaký mega dumpola party. Mega dumpola party bude až po prekonaní hodnoty 200, ale od toho sme riadne ďaleko. Zatiaľ stále, čo sa týka S&P 500 marketu. Nemôžeme tu povedať, že by tu bol nejako pokazený trend, keďže toto je vytvorenie high, low a high. Tu je to také všelijaké veľmi dosť príkre a skôr by som povedal, že sa tu tvorí nejaký ten trojuholníček, ktorý bude určite treba sledovať. Ale hej, zase takéto tempo S&P 500 marketu v negatívnych správach nie je príliš veľmi udržateľné, lebo tu bolo všetko nebe a dudy, hej, čo sa ekonomiky týka, ale toto je dosť rýchle na to, aké správy prichádzajú v Amerike a tie správy neprichádzajú také, že sme v bull markete a mali by sme nejako šialene odpaľovať. Dobre, na daily začíname byť stále viac a viac negatívny, minimálne čo sa týka S&P 500 marketu. Keď to niekto traduje, tak na daily jednoznačne vidno, že vaša nejaká bod možného odrazu alebo supportu je na hodnote $4371 dolárov a potom až na $4264. Daily negatívna 12 hodinovka, negatívna prakticky na tých istých úrovniach, stochastic RSI a RSI sú negatívne naladené a VT Cross, toto je veľmi dôležité, VT Cross ostáva v bearish zóne, čiže jednoznačne na daily a na 12 hodinovke sa dostávame na S&P 500 markete do mierneho bearish trendu, ale pokiaľ držíme tie hodnoty 200, tak to nie je ešte nejaká veľká katastrofa a pozrieme sa ešte na dolár a následne končíme. Dolár zatiaľ veľmi silný, hlavne teda na 12 hodinovke a na daily. Hej, tu na plná podpora 21 a 30, takisto na 12 hodinovke dokonca zažívame odraz práve na stochastic RSI, plné nasmerovanie smerom hore, čiže tu je to veľmi v pohode. Na weekly sme na jednoznačnej hodnote rezistencie a ak máme trendovať s marketom, tak by malo prísť o testovanie práve hodnoty 21 a uvidíme, že či príde odraz a následne vytvorenie uptrendu, alebo pôjdeme zase testovať hodnoty 200, ktoré sa nachádzajú na línii 100 bodov pre S&P 500 market. Dobre, ďakujem vám veľmi pekne, že ste prišli na tento daný live stream. Tí, čo chcete, príďte vyskúšať, alebo to ešte vyskúšame, alebo nevyskúšame, ale máme tu koniec a máme tu end pool a ten pool jednoznačne vyhráva to, že nepríde navýšenie úrokových sadzieb, čo neprišlo a zase sa nič nestane. 60% ľudí si to zatiaľ zahlasovalo. Je to pool, tak sa prakticky skončil, hej, že príliš veľa vecí sa tam nestalo, ale z toho dlhodobého hľadiska uvidíme, že či to teda bude pravda. My battery is going to zero, čiže hodina 47 minút a baterka začala svietiť, čiže vieme, že aj tá baterka dostáva náklad, nemám ju ešte ani rok a už nevydrží ani 2 hodinky. Čiže ďakujem vám veľmi pekne, že ste prišli na tento daný live stream. Ďakujem veľmi pekne každému, kto dal donate, keďže ste boli, mám taký pocit, že traja, veľmi si to vážim v Žiline. Dám vedieť, že aké tričko, farbu trička alebo mikinu si vezmem a uvidíme, hej, poprípade pôjdem do obchodu a pofotím nejaké farby a následne to vyberieme a možno bude sranda, keď sa tam všetci stretneme s jednou farbou. Dobre, ďakujem vám veľmi pekne, my sa vidíme v ďalšom videu a zatiaľ vám prajem veľmi pekný večer. Vidíme sa.